Before we start the lecture for this week, I wanted to address a question that I had about the weekly quizzes. Now, I'm talking about the weekly homework quizzes. The question was, am I supposed to be able to look up the answers to the multiple choice questions for the homework, or do I need to make an educated guess based on the sources of information that you've given me for lecture and notes to complete the quizzes each week? The answer to that question is yes. You are supposed to make your best educated guess based on the knowledge that you've been given through the lecture, and if you happen to buy the textbook, through the textbook. Even on homework quizzes, I don't mind you doing outside research online. I do mind that on the tests, but on homework quizzes, you may do outside research if you want. You're probably not going to be able to find that information in basic outside research. The questions really come from my lectures, and they come from you making an educated guess based on what you learned in the lecture. It's designed to help you deepen your understanding of the material. With that being said, the tests are more of a comprehensive knowledge of what you learned for the eras in the lecture, in that they will test your retention of what you learned. So if you feel like the quizzes aren't really a reflection of what you learned in the lecture for the week, it's because it's not designed to work that way. The tests are designed to allow you to show what you've learned in lecture, whereas the quizzes help you to deepen your understanding of the material. Okay, so a lot of times my students say, well, that's great, Professor Evans, but I'm not doing real well on these quizzes and it's making me nervous. What I want to tell you is that I know that the quizzes are challenging for the week, and I also know that your learning, the full learning, comes out of you going back and looking at the correct answers and looking at the feedback on why that answer was correct. So from that standpoint, this is why the discussion posts are designed to give you a full 10 points. As long as you do the discussion post and you have the basic correct answer, you get full points for that. There will be times where the discussion post is evaluated for quality of writing, and in that case, I will let you know ahead of time that your discussion posts are going to be evaluated that week in an essay type format. So from that standpoint, that gives you a little bit of extra room to sort of breathe. Also, on the quizzes for the week, if you're kind of stuck between two answers, like let's say you're trying to answer a question and you're like, well, it's either A or C and I don't know which. If you call me and we discuss that question, I'm always willing to give you a point for that question because you took the time to reach out and really understand the concept that's being asked of you. So please use the phone. Please try to communicate with me whenever you're confused. So especially if you're confused after the fact. So let's say you take the quiz, you do poorly, and then you go back and read the correct answers and you're like, that still doesn't make sense to me. Please feel free to reach out to me by phone. You don't have to make an appointment with me. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call. And I'm pretty laxed about that. I'm happy to answer the phone. And if I don't answer, I'll call you back shortly so that we have that line of communication open so that you're learning. The point of the quiz is to help you further your learning. High Renaissance art in Italy. The High Renaissance is a climax of Renaissance art, and it lasted from 1500 to about 1550. It was in this time that painting reaches a pinnacle of technical mastery. If you were an Italian artist, you had to study in Rome, or you went to Rome to work on a project for a pope or some nobility. High Renaissance artists achieve the ideal of harmony and balance that is used by classical Greek and Roman artists. Bear with me, let's go down a rabbit hole for a second. I want to show you the stylistic feature chart that I have created for this era. So when I was in grad school, I had lots of complex information that I had to kind of sort through and that I really struggled to keep straight. And so I came up with this table system that helped me classify the different eras so that I could have information quickly at my fingertips. So I'm showing you an example of one of the sections of the table that I created. And I would suggest that you do this for every era of art history that we review. It will help you on the exam because the information will be right there in front of you. But it also kind of gives you a visual for the timeline of art and how we study it from the beginning of this class to the end. So I create a table, and the first column says chapter and time period. Now, since I didn't require the book, you don't really need to put a chapter there. But what you're looking for here is the era, and just information like where's the era. So High Renaissance in Florence and Italy is different than High Renaissance in Northern Europe. So your era is High Renaissance in Florence and Italy. Then I list the stylistic features. For every single era of art history, there is a list of stylistic features. So here the form is constructed by looking at a drawing and then drawing from life. Well, the form is constructed by looking and then creating a drawing from life. It has a more sculptural feeling and light is dispersed evenly. All High Renaissance works have idealistic elements that are combined with realistic elements. The pyramidal placement of the figure is popular. The corkscrew turn of the torso. The sense of calmness and serenity in the expressions on the faces. Artists that we study prominently: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. The artists that are Venetian are also, you could list them here. And then background information. We see a return to classical themes, and the Medici family is in power, commissioning art, and then they are banned. So you can see that this table keeps a lot of information organized, clear, and concise. I use this table to create an overview of the era of art history that we're going through. So as time goes on, I will use this table and give you an overview of each era based on this table. Let's go over the artistic hallmarks of the era one more time. We see a combination of ideal and real. Humanism is the norm. We see the corkscrew turn of the torso, the pyramidal shape of the figures, and serene expressions. This week I'd like to start by looking at what we see in the art during the High Renaissance in Italy. So typically we can break down each style by listing the stylistic characteristics of the era. For example, we know that High Renaissance art in Italy is characterized by two major elements: the idealistic and the realistic. So idealism plus realism equal High Renaissance, and I'm going to show you how in just a moment. let's practice that concept of ideal plus real. Here you can see the sculpture of Michelangelo's Pietà, and let's talk about what we can pick out as being idealistic in this sculpture. For one thing, Mary has a very youthful look to her. You can see that she has this perfect face that's very much a reflection of the standard of ideal beauty in society. Jesus has an ideal body for a 30-year-old, free from blemish. And there's this sense of serenity on their faces, this sort of ideal calmness that comes over the two of them. They also have very ideal proportions. Mary is 3 times the size of Jesus, so that she can hold Jesus, an adult man, on her lap. That combination of idealism allows for the serene feeling in the sculpture. So then we say, well, what is realistic? Well, remember, this is humanism, and you can easily see that Jesus's body looks like a very real human being. Mary's body looks very much like a real human being if you set aside the fact that she's idealized in proportion to Jesus. You can see that her body reflects an ideal standard of beauty that we typically hold true for ideal body types today. Her face is very realistic in the sense that you could reach out and touch it. We know exactly what Mary looks like. She has these very detailed features in her face, and so does Jesus. So you can see also the realism in the hands. If you look very closely, you can see all the veins in Jesus's hands. You can see his knuckles. You can see the muscle structure underneath the skin. Those things add together to get that combination of ideal plus real. Here you see the corkscrew turn of the torso, a pyramidal shape that dictates the placement of the figures. But the figures here, they always begin with a drawing. And so because of that, they tend to have sort of a sculpted feel. The Madonna here is depicted in an idealized fashion because she's youthful, she doesn't have any blemishes, she has these light rosy cheeks, a little bit of an olive undertone, and the baby is idealized as well. It has a sense of serenity and calmness. And just so you see that I don't favor Raphael over Leonardo da Vinci, I wanted to show you the corkscrew turn of the baby's body in Leonardo da Vinci's work as well. If you look at, this is a zoomed in version of Da Vinci's Madonna of the Rocks, and you can see the baby pointing up to Jesus in a sacred conversation. The baby sits with its bottom one direction, and then his shoulders are slightly turned towards the Madonna. This gives the figure a greater sense of movement, even though in the painting he's not actually moving, he's sitting still. It accentuates the gesture that we see. Here I have traced the corkscrew shape of the spine that we've been talking about as a stylistic hallmark of the High Renaissance. You can see how the baby's body twists in space as his bottom is more parallel to the viewer and his shoulder blades are more parallel to the Madonna. Here I'm drawing out the pyramidal composition for you. If you start with a line at the top of Mary's head and draw it down to the side of her hips on each side of her head, and then once again to the knee, you see that you get a perfect pyramid. It's a pyramid that's based on the equilateral triangle. In this way, the Renaissance masters liken the human figure to nature and reason and logic, just the same way we talked about Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvius Man. Artists that we're going to look at in the High Renaissance in Italy are Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, Giorgione, Titian, and Tintoretto. That is all of the Disegno and Colore artists put into one. Now, I just mentioned Disegno and Colore. We will get further into that concept in the module sections. There's some background information that's really important for you to be able to understand before we get moving into the module sections. So let's talk about that really quickly. So first of all, wealthy families have lots of local power. Each local entity like Florence, Siena, Venice, Rome, they all have their local structure of power. Those local structures of power are have much influence. So for Florence, the Medicis are the people that have the most power. Now, Italy isn't controlled the same way that it is today, where the entire country has one governing body. Each of the different local areas have a controlling nucleus of power. The Medicis are in power for a while, but then a new ruling family comes in and takes over, and because the Medicis are so powerful, they kick them out. They will eventually return into power. The church is a major commissioner of art, and they work in conjunction with the ruling powers to pay for art and have influence in society. So a lot of times the church will commission the art. So let's say the Sistine Chapel, for example, was commissioned by the church. But the Pope has a lot of power in terms of the ruling family. So right now they believe in that divine right to rule and the idea that the ruler was chosen by God. The High Renaissance is a culmination or apex of an information explosion and scientific discovery that happens at the end of the Middle Ages. A lot of the technical realism or realistic representation of the figure that you see in painting coming from the High Renaissance is due to that explosion of information technology. The classical themes from antiquity come back because the artists are going to antiquity and studying the hyperrealism that came from the Greek and Roman eras. We have a new concept that comes along called the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. For now, just keep that in the back of your mind that the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation begin in this era. I will explain them in detail in the module. Humanism is a dominant concept. Society is not a collective society anymore at all. It is very highly individualized.